Hey everyone, thank you for coming back to Be Not Afraid. Today, my guest is Alvin Lui, and he has started Courage is a Habit. Now, the point of this show is always to lift the voices of dissidents, those who speak truth to the power that would rather have us silenced. So I think you'll really enjoy this, and welcome, Alvin.
Hey, thank you for having me. This is a great honor to be here, and looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Let's get started. So Alvin, I just want to talk about what it is that you do, what Courage is a Habit is about, and really how you got started.
So, Courage is a Habit. It's an organization that builds tools and resources and strategies for the average parent and legislators so that they know how to stay on offense without apologies to help fight the indoctrination in the K-12 systems, whichever state you live in. And the way I got started was I moved my young family from California in April 2020. And if anybody remembers, this is right in the beginning of COVID when we actually had no idea what COVID was, that we thought was going to be millions and millions of people that were going to die. And we didn't move because of COVID. We already planned on moving because we didn't want to raise children in California for a lot of reasons. People from California understand. And if you're not from California, you probably still understand. So we moved to the Midwest. And the short of it is, I didn't want to fight. I didn't feel like that was my life. I didn't want to do that. But when I got to Indiana, and I love Indiana. Indiana's treated us fantastically. We love it. We live in a wonderful suburbs here in Indiana. But I saw the same seeds that had already been planted in the Midwest that ruined California. The only difference is most people here really don't know it because they hadn't lived through it like we did in California. So I recognized everything because we already been through it. And so I had a small nonprofit here that was focused on the local level in the local area where I lived at. And I learned a lot. And mostly through that process, I saw that it was happening all over the country. And the things that would normally isolate to California and New York, now it's being spread and growing all over the country. And so I knew that if I were to really try to make a measurable difference, I had to create something on a national level. The issues plaguing the K through 12 is coming from the same source. And we can talk a little bit about that. It's social emotional learning, it's weaponizing kindness, language contamination. It's the same strategy everywhere. So Courage is a Habit was born from talking to a lot of different people from different states and different avenues in our education space, and talking to a lot of parents over the course throughout the country and hearing the same things. And so Courage is a Habit creates resources that anybody can apply to no matter which state you are, because a lot of people still think that this issue is a red and blue state thing, and it's not. If you live in a red state or a red county, you are absolutely not immune from this indoctrination at all. In a lot of ways, the red counties or the red states get hit harder because parents they're unaware. They believe because they're a red state, they're protected. So is in that apathy is where a lot of things get pushed in almost as fast as blue states.
Right. It almost seems like they're targeted. We have a similar situation where we moved here from Seattle to Utah, the most family-friendly state, supposedly. And it's interesting to see how many people are just accepting of all of this. Like they hear that surface level of, oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It sounds wonderful. Who wouldn't want to be more, especially it seems like the religious are very inclined to accept all of these things. So in California, was there a lot of pushback, or did people just jump on the bandwagon immediately?
Oh, immediately. Because for one thing, California has always been left-leaning, very left, right? But beyond that, because we were the first of this kind, nobody knew what was happening because there was nothing to look to. Like today, if it's happening in, it happens in Michigan or Maine or, Nebraska, wherever, we can point to Seattle, Portland, we can point to California, we can point to Virginia, we can point to New York and say, you're on the same path. But when what's happening in California, there was nothing to point to. because we were the first of its kind. So yeah, no, this is it. They just, California was easy because there was nothing, nobody knew, right? Most people didn't know, and the people who did know, they were silenced. There's nothing, there's no platform for them to warn anybody, to say this. You know, even now, even in Indiana today, with all this evidence, people, oh, it's just conspiracy theorists. Oh, you're just fear mongering. Literally, there's porn in schools. You're cutting off the breasts of 15-year-old girls, and it's still fear mongering. Oh, it's conspiracy theorists, when there's cold hard facts. So California, when people were warning, go, hey, this is where it's going to go, then for sure they would just shout it down as conspiracy theorists. And today we know, and sadly, in California, every conspiracy theorist that brought up things in California, not only did they turn out to be right, things turned out to be worse than what they thought. Because there is no conspiracy theorist 10 years ago that said one day they're going to remove breasts of 15-year-old girls, and if you try to fight them, you're going to call you bigots. There's no conspiracy theorist that was that wild 10 years ago.
Right. So that's an interesting thing, because we talk about it being left or right, and it doesn't seem like protecting kids should be a left or right issue.
Absolutely not.
Did you start off as a conservative? Are you a conservative today? Would you call yourself one?
I am absolutely not political. I've never been into politics. I dislike politics. And in fact, I dislike politics more now than I ever have. Because most people who come from ethnic backgrounds, immigrant families, we don't, and this is true for Indians and Hispanics and Mexicans and Asians and you name it, Japanese, Filipinos, we don't look at things as conservative or liberal or left or right. Our parents and grandparents, it's simply just wisdom, life experience being passed down. You work hard, you don't blame, you have grit, and when you fail, don't blame anybody else. You learn from it, you get up, you keep going, and you try to leave your children better than you left yourself. Those are not, today in America, those are deemed conservative, and they're teaching kids, those are actually white privilege. Those are white supremacy values. That's all complete bunk. Those are not left or right or political. They've made it political so that way they can suck it out of the children's lives through school and through things like critical race theory and culture responsive teaching and those type of things in school. But
Alvin, wouldn't you say that is colonialism? Like, that is absolutely usurping the values of certain people. They come here and they have, and I speak to a lot of people, especially that are Chinese, who've escaped communism. They're taking the values that people have found, and they've said, this is truth. This is common sense. This is how you achieve.
Yeah.
And now these people are coming in and saying, you don't have a voice anymore.
Right.
We're going to do this.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to help you because you're a person of color and you need help and you're oppressed.
Right.
And then most immigrants are like, well, we were oppressed. That's why we came here.
Right.
You know? And so now you're telling me I'm oppressed, but you don't know what oppression really is. We know what oppression really is. This is not oppression. This is freedom.
Right.
Right. And then so if you have to talk about things like unconscious bias or microaggressions, then you're not oppressed. You're just making things up.
You're looking for reasons.
Yeah, you're looking for a reason. Now you have a horrible solution looking for a problem that doesn't exist, right? And so I don't consider myself anything other than what I was raised at under the values of my culture, of most immigrants' culture. And this is why no matter where you go in the world, these are the values that parents have for their kids. And it's not a right or left thing. It's just wisdom passed down, because America is a very young country, right? We're an experiment, and it's a great experiment because we have a constitution, we have individual rights, we have things that most people, nobody else has ever had in the history of the world. And that's what makes America so amazing. This is why people like my family can come here. This is why people like your family can come here. But the negative of America is not in its founding document or its constitution, it's in its youth. Because America is, right, it's 400 years old, right? Something like that, right? So but when you're talking about immigrants, like coming from different places, they're thousands of years old. Throughout those years, people have tried these nonsense things, and they have nonsense results, like we're seeing today with the marching and a man can get pregnant, and you get this nonsense And so if the country goes on long enough, if you don't take the country down with your nonsense, which is what they're trying to do today with America, if we get past this, that now we've lost generations of kids through this. So in another 100 years, when someone tries it again, hopefully this country will have some wisdom to say, no, 100 years ago, we tried this nonsense and we lost like a whole generation of kids to it. No more. So when you try to bring this to immigrant families, they go, no, you're absolute nonsense. We're 2,000 years old. We're 2,500 years old. These are wisdom that's lived through 2,000 years. And you at, 300 something years are trying to tell us this is the better way. You don't know a better way because you're a young country.
So are the immigrants that you speak to, are they the more willing to get out there and fight?
Yeah, though, especially the ones who haven't been educated here. Now, some of the younger ones are getting brainwashed because they go through the social emotional learning, they go through the critical race theory, they go through the queer theory. But largely, the immigrant families are the ones that are protecting their kids better than, let's say, Caucasian families, because a lot of the activists are white kids because they've been born here. They get the white guilt. They get the white privilege being hoisted at them. So it's easier to turn them into activists. When you grow up in an immigrant family, you kind of get that slapped out of you real fast. When you come home and, why'd you get a B-? Well, the teacher's racist. Go do your homework. Right. Right. So, so you get that. And so that gets, that kind of nonsense gets slapped out of you pretty quickly when you're trying to blame in an immigrant family, because especially if you're still living with grandparents, if your grandparents are still alive, whatever, and they remember what escaping Cuba was, escaping Venezuela was, they know what South Africa feels like, things like that. You come home and you go, well, I got a C+ because of white privilege. You get that slapped out of you pretty quickly, right? I have such a deep love and respect for the Muslim community, because they remind us the value of embracing exclusion. They don't worship at the altar of inclusion, which has been weaponized to guilt parents. And embracing exclusion is the way we all should be thinking about how we raise our children. Because if you think about it, I'm very, very exclusive. When people accuse me or encourage a habit of what we do is that you don't like inclusion, I go, you're 100% right. I don't include child abusers. I don't include BLM riots. I don't include people who teach our children that America's oppressive. I don't include people who tell children that they're born in the wrong body. There's a lot of things I don't include. I am not inclusive at all on a lot of things. When you're raising children, there's a lot of things you should be excluding. Rated R movies, porn, right?
It's literally our job to train our kids. And they guilt you. Like they've already kind of ruined the relationship of fathers, of them being, the masculine, the patriarchy, right? They're literally clubs that are anti-patriarchy.
That's right.
But now they're coming after motherhood. The United Nations, that all women should be out of the house working.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Leave the kids undefended. Sure, of course.
Yeah, and absolutely, from cradle to grave, get them under this social and emotional learning, which people don't realize is social and emotional compliance. And the most important thing that I can think of, the most important role, call me old-fashioned, I don't care, is being a good mother, being a good parent.
Yeah.
And this idea that they can take that away from us, or they can shame us and say, oh, you're teaching your child terrible habits. How are we getting to this point where we are embracing all sorts of depravity? And when I say depravity, I'm not talking about people who are homosexual, who have embraced stabilization, and they're just like, we just want to live our lives. This authoritarianism is frightening.
It's against actually classic liberalism.
It's against classical liberalism. This new, this is leftist. And it really seems that it's more of a globalism.
It is. It's a globalism. Yeah. It's a very thing that the 60s kids in Berkeley protested against.
Right. Yeah.
They're screaming for free speech. And then the Berkeley kids today are screaming to quell speech. So it's complete opposite.
Exactly. And the thing is that I don't think they realize that they're being used, that they're the water carriers for global elites.
That's right.
All of this sound with capitalism. Yeah. Who do you think's funding all of these organizations?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
at the school level, the way, in order to create everything you just said, no matter if you're in Cuba or China or Venezuela or anywhere else, the one thing you have to do is you have to separate the child from the family, from their parents. You have to. That's the one goal, no matter what time you live in, no matter the technology. It's TikTok today, it was a radio yesterday, it'll be virtual reality tomorrow. But whatever the technology is, the one thing that must happen is they must separate children from their parents. Now, how they get there may vary depending on time and country. Like in China, they did it through class, because obviously China is a monolith, just like most countries are monolith. But here they can't do it by class because we have a middle class, a quite successful middle class, even though it's dwindling, it's still more successful than most middle class in the planet. So they have to do it by race, and they have to do it by gender. And the fastest way to separate children from families, from their parents and their families, is by sexualizing them early. And here's the playbook. When you sexualize children early, you guarantee that the parents will push back, because what normal parent wants you to sexualize your child? That's a guarantee. You guarantee to create an adversarial environment. Anytime you sexualize a child, you can guarantee there will be a violent reaction from parents. Rightly so, right?
Right.
So when they do that, you then can deem the parents unsafe and abusive. Now, that strategy plays out today in the transgender cult. They confuse the child, make them believe they're the wrong sex obviously behind the parents' back. And then when the parents push back, they go, "You're not safe, you're abusive, and the school is the safe place." So that's the strategy, and sexualizing kids, creating porn in schools and letting the parents fight back against it. Then you go, "You don't want kids to have representation, you're unsafe," right? And parents got to see that strategy and that manipulation. And so today in K through 12, that's largely coming through school counselors and social workers. And so Courage is a Habit did a expose, and that we're still doing it, we're still releasing things, on the American School Counselor Association. Okay, and so we call them ASCA. They call themselves ASCA, ASCA, the American School Counselor Association. So most parents believe that they are still the nice guidance counselors from the past, where you see maybe once or twice every 4 years you're in high school, right? They help you with your academics and college prep courses. Those people are long gone. And most parents still believe that when they hear counselor, they still think that they're long gone. They now call themselves school counselors, or more specifically, they're agents for change. That's what they call themselves. And so they are the biggest purveyors of the transgender cult. They push the transgender cult more than anybody else, more than teachers, more than school board members, more than superintendents. And so we went to their conferences, we went to their webinars, we went to their certification programs. As much as we hate giving them money, but we had to do that to get the information. And so we have videos, PowerPoints, handouts, and we're exposing them for who they are. And you can find that on courageisahabit.org under the tab School Counselors. So these school counselors now come in under the guise of mental health. So before, you would have one guidance counselor for the entire school, high school, maybe one or two, right? So today, through mental health grants and through the Biden's administration, they're infusing schools with hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to hire more school counselors, more social workers. And they are meeting with your child one-on-one and asking them invasive personal questions. And the moment they see, just like a good groomer does, and a sex trafficker, just like a groomer, once they see that there's a vulnerability, something happened in your home, a death, all kinds of things. Life happens to all kids all the time.
Even if you're just a tomboy, a girl who's a tomboy, right?
Tomboy.
I'm wondering what about a child with a lisp?
Anything at all, anything. Children go through all kinds of things with their parents. Your parents take away your TV privileges and you're mad at them. I'll tell you a recent story. I was on the Twitter space yesterday, and I will share a parent that literally last night, we had a big Twitter space, and a parent shared this with us. She said, "My daughter, has always had some behavioral problems, like a lot of preteens, and so you work through it. And she did something, and then the mother took the phone away as a punishment, as all good parents should, right? We remove things as consequence and punishment. So she took her phone, goes to school, she gets these surveys. Have you ever had suicidal thoughts? Right? These climate surveys, they're always asking kids all day long, waiting for that. It's like fishing. They're just waiting for that get the line. She says
like once a week. In some of our schools, it's once a week that they do these surveys.
Or twice a week, or 3 times a week. It just depends. And they just keep going until they get a hit. And today, for that girl, she goes, I want to kill myself because my mom took my phone. So now she is suicide ideation, right? Why you don't get, maybe your parents are abusive, maybe you're a boy, maybe you just don't, maybe you got to identify as this, and they start planting these things. And when the mom comes in and says, no, I'm not good with this, she's abusive, she's unsafe. Because I want your audience to remember one thing. If you can redefine terms, you don't have to change the laws. If you can redefine terms, you don't have to change the laws. And so today in K-12, the school counselors and social workers, through the guise of mental health, through social emotional learning, that's the program that's completely covered all K-12 systems, they are redefining the word safe and abuse. They're redefining the word safe and abuse. But when they say, I want kids to be safe, most parents nod and say, of course, I do too. But that's not what they mean. They mean that if you don't succumb to the transgender delusion, you're unsafe. So they treat a father who refuses to call his son by the opposite sex pronoun or call his son James, Janie. They treat him now the same as if he was burning him with cigarettes because he's unsafe. We would normally say the parent's abusive. What do we think of abuse? Starving, drugs, violence, right? Those are unsafe environments, right? And then at that point, you try to remove the child from the environment and then work with the parents so that the household can be safe again for the child. But today, that's not what they do.
Safe means compliant.
Compliant. So safe means you better bow to it or you're deemed abusive. And they've expanded the word safe and abuse, which is why in any state, when you go to fight this, they keep saying safe, 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 abuse, neglect. They say that because they try to drive it into your head that if you don't succumb to this, then you're unsafe. And then when they can establish that, the social workers now have the ability to work with outside agencies to come remove your child from you.
They've really been working on this because we became a culture craving safety since the pandemic, right?
That's right.
So everything is
safe space.
Very much paranoid. Very much
safe
paranoid
space, safe,
of yes, are we safe? Are we in harm's way? Harm is another word that we hear a lot of. You're causing me harm if you don't do X.
That's right.
I think that a lot of parents are finding themselves. I've definitely found myself like afraid to tell my son, you better get your homework done. Because you don't know if your child is going to suddenly turn around and use that against you. Because that's what our kids are being taught. Even in good homes that are trying to be responsible, our kids are still being taught, if I don't want to do something, claim suicide. They're very much normalizing it.
I would say that they actually target the safe homes. And I'll tell you why. The kids who actually are unsafe, they've got them. The system will take care of them. The system will ensure they're radicalized, right? Because they truly they're unsafe. So once you pull them from their parents, there'll be plenty of therapists and bad actors to move them to the transgender cult, to make them activists, foster kids, foster care. They've already got them. What the schools are worried about isn't the kids who actually need help, because those kids, we should be focusing all the mental health, actual real mental health on those kids, because those kids actually need help on an individual basis. And we're going to try to work with their parents to try to reconnect them with their parents, not pull them apart. That's what mental health before means. That's what interventions used to mean. You take individual children that need help, find out what the problem is, and try to help the parents be better parents so you can bond them together. Today's mental health initiatives, social emotional learning, says they help those kids, but they take the money and target people like you. And I'll tell you why. Because the safe homes are the ones that produce strong, independent, successful children. Those children grow up to be adults that can't be manipulated. And worse, those adults might grow up to fight back against the system because they have education, they can read, they're successful, they're strong, they're not brainwashed. So you need to start eliminating those type of people, because they might start influencing other people. Like, they don't want you and I to talk because now you have an audience. Now they're listening to us. That's not good for the people who are pushing this critical race theory, this transgender ideology, the people who, so they can control the masses when the children get older, to try to drive the wedge between the parents and the child. So now you can go up there and do your homework, or you're going to be grounded. Now you have to second guess yourself. That's what they're targeting.
Yeah. Can you define, because I think so many people believe that queer just means to turn lesbian or gay, but queering has a much more nefarious meaning, don't you think?
Yeah, queer theory is just an offshoot of a critical theory. In order to create a Marxist ideology, you have to create revolutionists. In order to create revolutionists, you have to separate your children from your parents. Queer theory, like critical theory, allows the idea that you can be a different sex. There's no truth. A man can be a woman can be a man. In that, if you can drive that theory, not as a theory, but if you can implement that theory into children early as a belief system, a lot of good things happen to you when you're a Marxist and you want to take over a community or a country. Number one, you separate them from their parents, like I said earlier. Number two, you make them into highly anxiety-ridden, highly malleable people who are constantly on edge in their emotions. When you can drive confusion into a young person, the last thing on their mind is academics. The last thing on their mind is, how do I become a better contributing, successful member of society? Or how do I raise a good family? How do I be a strong person?
Right. It's weakening them.
It's weakening them. And more importantly, it's getting them to look at everyone else and say, you must agree with me. You must acknowledge me. If you don't, you're erasing me. If you don't, you're canceling. You're not, you don't use the word cancel. If you don't, it's genocide. You're erasing me. You're erasing my existence. So queer theory, like critical race theory, even though they use sex and race, largely ends up in the same place, which is influencing a young person to focus on things that have no real solution or outcome. If you blame race, you can always blame race. If you believe you're a different sex, you can always change. This is why the 72 genders, 100 genders, it just keeps going. Once you get them to adopt this belief system, then you can insert anything you want to keep them just on that edge of anxiety, of depression, of anger. And then it's very useful. A lot of good things happen if you're a Marxist activist pushing ideology. You plant these seeds in these young people, and then when they become 16, 18, 20, 21, 25, you have just an army at your disposal.
Yeah, we saw a lot of that in Seattle.
Dude, I've seen a lot in Seattle. In our space, we have several people who are, leaders in their space. And Lisa Logan talks a lot about the whole child, whole community, which is what's coming to all the schools. She does a great job.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The whole child, whole community.
Okay. Yeah. So that is the next phase to social emotional learning. This is what happens when you allow your kindness to be weaponized. This is why we now talk, instead of, we talk about the technical stuff like social emotional learning, how it gets into surveys, data mining, and we'll talk about whole school, whole child, community schools. But all that only is possible if you let kindness get weaponized. Because when they can weaponize your kindness, they can push you all the way to the top of their goals. So let's take the transgender cult, for example. I'm not going to call my daughter a he. If you don't, she's going to kill herself. It's about empathy. Okay, I'll call her a he. I'm going to give your daughter a breast binder. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to let you do that. If you don't let her do a breast binder, she's going to kill herself. And what's the matter? You don't like empathy? Okay, I gave her a breast binder. Right. Repeat that for drugs, for puberty blockers. Repeat that for cross-sex hormones. Repeat that all the way to surgery. So when you let when parents don't embrace exclusion, this is what I talked about earlier, then this is the next phase, because you're not stopping them, so they're going to keep going, because that's what Marxist people do, right? This is what ideologues do. This is what activists do. So whole school, whole child is it's a next phase for social emotional learning. And because they've already established that parents are unsafe and abusive, now they're going to sell it as the schools need to step in and do certain things that the parents can't. Now the child needs to be educated in the whole child. When they whole, it means spiritually, mentally, physically. Everything that you're supposed to be doing as a parent, now the school does it. So here's how they're going to sell it. Here's how they're going to sell community schools. And they always start with, every time you hear marginalized people, marginalized community, underserved communities, every time you hear any variation of that, you know you're getting set up. That's a big tip for everybody listening. Once you hear people of color, underserved community, marginalized community, any of that variation, anything that they say afterwards is a setup for something that's going to come after you and your children, for everybody, right? So community schools, they will say underserved communities, parents cannot get their kids to school when they have to take them to things like the dentist. And they'll say research shows, evidence-based, they'll never show it to you. Evidence-based, because it'll just be their own bunk data. It'll be their own community, own people that does this and then give them the data. So it's, they're surveying themselves. They'll say evidence-based is that community schools increase academics, increase graduation, everybody's kumbaya happy. So now you should do community schools. And parents will nod and go, okay, just like they did with social emotional learning. And look how that's turning out. So they will tell you, we will bring a dentist van into school. So the child can just go get their dentist. You don't have to do anything. Parents don't have to pay. Underserved parents, underserved people with no health care, because health care is a right. Some parents don't have health care. They will go to the dentist. They will check their teeth, get the cleaning, go right back to school. They don't miss any time. Parents, sounds great. What they don't tell you is behind the dentist van will be the Planned Parenthood van, will be abortion van, will be the puberty blocker van, will be the transgender surgery van. That's what they don't tell you.
So what I feel like the way that this is all started, it's really kind of disgusting, but I feel like it has been the Black society has been a guinea pig for all of this.
They have.
They're the ones.
You are 100% right.
They're the ones who've been taught to hate, to look everywhere for racism, to always be miserable, to literally be told that, quote unquote, Black girl joy is the most important part of education.
Yeah.
And so they realized, and it took them years, it took them decades,
yeah,
to break these people, but they've done it. And now that they've done it, they're like, oh, that worked, and that worked. So now let's take what worked with this group. We use them as lab rats.
That's right.
And let's now take our experiment and put it out towards other minorities, ones that it's harder, because in Black families, it's often, not all the time, but it's often that single mom situation. Okay. In other minority, quote unquote, marginalized families, there's still multiple families living together a lot of time, or multiple generations living together. So it's harder.
Right. Yes.
And then on top of that, let's take the kids who are in quote unquote privileged, often Caucasian families, and let's give them a reason that they need to fit in too, because otherwise they're just going to hate themselves. They're either taught you have to hate yourself because you come from a strong family.
That's right.
With strong values and with quote unquote privilege. Or you have to agree to let us break you as well.
That's right. You said that perfectly. The Black community has been a guinea pig for decades, which is why as the civil rights movement came and went, and the laws that were discriminating against Black folks started to be gone, the community, they've actually, as a family, done worse than ever, right? You can see the fatherlessness, the single motherhood. When there were laws that was discriminated against them, they were intact. Now that there's literally nothing a white person can do that a Black person can't, or any other race, right? Now they're doing worse than ever. And so the way I have put it is they took the chains off their ankles and put it on their mind.
Oh, that's
because you can break chains, right? Slaveries, you can break chains, and we've done it here. There's still slavery that happens today, but we actively try to go to different countries to try to end slavery. So you can break the chains. When you put a chain on a child's mind, you can never break it, because when you only have a very small window to learn as a human being, right? Every year that you fall behind, it becomes like a negative in investment. Instead of compound interest, you get compound ignorance. So when you tell a Black child, and now, like you said, they've found out what worked, what didn't. They've been able to streamline this, and now they're trying to scale it to everybody after they've experimented on the Black community. But when you tell a child all these things, the critical race theory, the queer theories, they don't focus on academics. This is why the reading comprehension for the Black community, it's so insanely low. If you cannot read, you cannot learn. And if you can't learn, then you can't earn. So you will never be more than a minimum wage worker, if even that. So that means that you will always be dependent on government, and free stuff sounds pretty good when you can't ever earn anything more than a minimum wage job. That's very useful. So children should be learning to read between 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. That's when they learn their basics to read, right? And then after that, it's just building on their vocabulary, building on their grammar, building on things like that. But you learn to read between 3 to 6, 3 to 7, thousands of years.
Right.
Every year you fall behind makes your future, makes your 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 harder and harder. And there will be a point where you just can't catch up, because your mind starts to, as you get older, you learn you learn slower. So it's like compound interest, but compound ignorance. As soon as you can get a child to go on that path, you will destroy them. You can break them. And now it's just a matter of time, and generationally, they will also pass on that ignorance to their own children, because they don't know. You can only teach what you know.
Right.
You hear some amazing stories where some single Black mothers go, I know what I don't know, but I don't want my child to be like that. And they try to get their children out of it. But that's more the exception rather than the rule. So what you said was absolutely right. They've experimented on the Black community, found out what worked, what was too slow, streamlined it, and now they're scaling that same blueprint to the rest of the country, which is why now you've got kids that are non-Black kids. Their reading comprehension is going down. Their math comprehension is going down. Their proficiencies are going down in every race. Even the Asians, who typically are like high 90%, even they have come down. Now, they're still higher than everybody else, but if you compare Asian kids' math proficiency today to the ones in the 80s, it's gone down.
How come it's going down in Asian communities? A lot of people will say that Asians are just naturally smarter. My belief is that it's probably because the parents are pushing it more so than their brains are larger or something like that.
What I do know is this: if you take a Black child and you put them in an Asian household, that Black child will do just as good as an Asian child. I'll tell you that right now. Because, like I said earlier, ethnic families just slap that out of your kids. Let me back up for a second.
Sure.
In my Asian house, when I was growing up, my father always told my siblings and I, if you're born in this country and you can't make it anywhere. In most ethnic cultures, and I can definitely speak for the Asian culture, we always tell our children, you're only one generation away from success. So you could come here with nothing except a shirt on your back. You could you have holes in your shoes. We will always tell our child, hey, you could be a doctor or a lawyer. You could be anything you want. Just study hard, just knuckle down, and you will. And largely that's actually true, because if you look at successful Asians and you look at their parents, it would be shocking as to that was only one generation, because the success of an Asian man or woman, it's so far from where their parents came from. You would think many generations have passed in order to kind of work out that poverty, but it doesn't. It's just one generation.
Great.
The reason why that is because we keep telling our children, you're only one generation away from success. You're only one generation away from changing the lifeblood of your heirs. We don't remind them of where we came from. We remind them as a point of appreciation, but not as a point of life philosophy. There's a difference. My parents told me all about my grandfather, my great-grandfather. They're bad, they're good, the thing, but that's okay, because they're telling me my family history. What my parents did not do was use that as my life philosophy. Here's what critical race theory does. Every time a Black child doesn't succeed, they remind them, they look back 3 generations as to why they can't succeed. Whereas Asians tell the children, if they're not successful, to look forward 1 generation. So if you take a child and every time something goes wrong, you transport them with a time machine back 3 generations to explain why they can't succeed. Then there's another child, every time they don't succeed, you transport them in the future generation, 1 generation ahead, and say, but look where you can be. Don't worry, you got that C today, that's unacceptable. Move it up to a B+, because one day, that's where you're going to be. Black kid gets a C. Oh, let me tell you, it's white supremacy and white privilege and slavery. Let me take you back 3 generations, explain that C to you. Your teacher must be
extremely insulting and
yes,
and really harmful to the
yes.
It's just, I think that it makes the people who fought so hard because they wanted more opportunities, because I do believe that there was a time in the African community where people who were freed slaves or just after the civil rights movement were like, oh my gosh, we get all the opportunities.
Right.
And instead of looking back and going, wow, these people did this so that I would have opportunity.
Right.
Instead, they're like, look what they had to go through. This was so terrible. Was it terrible? Absolutely. Yeah. But they didn't do it so that their offspring could wallow.
Right. That's right. So you're right. They wallow in it and they teach them that that's a life philosophy. So every time you don't succeed, it's because of the way your great-grandfather was treated.
Right.
Whereas Asians go, if you don't succeed, you've squandered what your great-grandfather went through.
Yes.
Those are 2 very different life philosophies. If you teach a human being one philosophy through the critical race theory lens, you teach another child the 1 generation forward philosophy. If you compound throughout life, when you meet them when they're 30, 40 years old, one will be infinitely more successful than the other. Right. Simply because their life philosophy is every time they fail, they go, I better not complain, I better not blame, because I would have squandered my great-grandfather's sacrifice. The other person goes, I'm not successful because my great-grandfather, what he went through. That's it. That's what critical race theory.
Now when you watch a lot of debates and things like that, you're watching Asian people, young Asians, join into the conversation. That's right. Where's that coming from? How are they grabbing them?
It's because, and this is where the Asian communities go wrong, because Asian people are largely not political. They still believe that when you drop your kids off to school, it's about academics. What they don't realize is that schools are literally teaching the great-grandson the same ideology that the great-grandfather had to run from. That's how they're getting their kids.
It's frightening. So tell me, Alvin, how do we reach these people? How do we make them realize that this is in the schools and that they do have to stand? One of the things that I realized, because I'll just be blunt here, but before like 2020, African Americans and Asian people didn't really hang out a whole lot together.
They really don't. They really don't. The only time you get that is if a Chinatown's next to like a black ghetto, because you get the Chinese ghetto and the black ghetto.
Yes.
And then when they do interact, it's pretty violent. So yeah.
I was gonna say it's not great.
It's not good. Yeah, they don't sit down and eat together. Yeah, they don't.
And so all of a sudden in 2020, I saw so many people standing up and saying, "Oh no, we have to get involved because what we ran from is on our doorsteps."
Right. We've got a lot of. It always trips me out when I see these like very old, nice, people who reminded me of my grandmother, right? When I was little, it reminds me of my grandmother when I was like a little boy.
Yeah.
And they're just a fireball, right? Because they come from Korea, or they come from, China, or they go from, South, right? Korea or China or Cuba.
Right.
And they're just a fireball because they're so irate. And how stupid Americans are to let this happen when they're like, and they remember as a little girl, because they were very little when communism came for their country.
Right.
So now that they're old and they look like some people grandmother, some of them, they're great grandmothers, and they fight harder than anybody else.
Right. And I just posted an interview that I did with a woman who wrote the book Dragonology, and she came of age. She was 16 when Mao came to power. And
they don't hold back because they have nothing.
Fire.
They're fire, right? because they are so incensed. They cannot believe the stupidity of Americans to not simply just look at history. And we're not talking about thousands of years ago. Communism came in not that long ago, right?
Yeah,
so it's not like
60,
you're saying, hey, can you go back to the, yeah, you're not saying go back to 1700 or 1800, right?
Right.
Communism came, so that, they just can't believe how stupid we are, because all we had to do is just go back a few decades to see it start in China. And now they're doing it here. It's the same thing. It's a Miles Red Card.
Exactly.
And diversity, inclusion, equity, which we don't call it DEI, we call it DIE, because everything it touches dies, right? DIE is just Miles' little red book.
Absolutely.
That's it.
This is a new cultural revolution. And that is what the hardest thing to understand when I try to talk to teachers, history teachers, and they don't get it.
Well, because those teachers went through academia, because they've been brainwashed. It's a system. It's not an individual thing. It's a system thing. ASCA, the American School Counselor Association, they just pump out counselors who are just about the transgender cult. Teachers, same thing, right? So
I was talking to one therapist who said that the goal is it's no longer to heal problems. The goal is to become advocates for activists.
Activism, and to affirm. That's it. They're not trying to heal problems. They're just to affirm.
Yes, constantly to affirm. Meanwhile, we have people who are detransitioning. We have kids who are extremely angry.
Yeah,
because
that they've been let down.
Nobody told them.
No one told them.
No one, even their parents, they kept their mouths shut because they were afraid they were going to be called unkind, or that their child was going to commit suicide. And like the Chloe Cole.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's like, I was never suicidal.
Yeah.
I was never suicidal, and they took my parents in a room and told them that I was.
Yeah. And that's why we always start when we talk to parents is we don't talk about some of the technical stuff. We go, your kindness is being weaponized against you. And we teach them about things like language contamination. So here's an example I use, and you're welcome to use it as often as you like. Here's an exercise that I do, and I'll do it with you. So if somebody says, I'm going to teach my son, he's 7 years old, 8 years old, I'm going to teach him about empathy. In 5 seconds, in your mind, what does that mean to you if I'm teaching an 8-year-old, 7-year-old empathy versus, let's say, if I was teaching a 17-year-old, which is going to be a little bit more nuanced. But as a 7, 8-year-old, 6-year-old, what would you think if I say
think about how others might feel?
Okay, great. So you, along with 99% of other parents, when the school goes, I'm just teaching empathy, they will go, okay, right? Just like personal responsibility, decision-making, be kind. So parents would go, okay, yeah, that's what I do too. And what did you say empathy was?
To think about how others might feel.
Think about others might feel. Okay. So then what they do is that they use your vocabulary, but not your dictionary. So what that means is in K-12, they will teach that little boy or that little girl. Empathy means that by the time she's 13, 14, 15, and she's in a bathroom, shower, locker room, and a man or boy or a grown man comes and drops his pants and stands in front of her, instead of having that reaction that most girls or any girl, all women would have, she now has to exercise empathy. Now, parents would go, wait a minute, that's not what I mean. I go, wait a minute, what did you say empathy was? What did you just say it was?
To think about how others might feel.
So now think about how he might feel.
Right.
Then parents are horrified when I do that exercise with them, because they'll be like, that's not what I mean. I go, I know. They know that that's what they think you mean too. So they use your vocabulary, but not your dictionary. So every time a school tells you they're teaching X trait or they're teaching this, don't think, oh, I teach that at home too. Here's the question I want your listeners, your parents, to ask themselves. Every time a school tells you we're only teaching this trait or virtue, in your mind, you should ask yourself this one question. Through whose lens is that trait being taught? Okay. Through whose lens is that trait being taught? Because traits are actually not good or bad. We put a positive connotation on a trait because we're good, decent people. But empathy is not good or bad. Empathy is only a trait. It's a neutral trait. If we apply it to our family and our friends and the people we can help, that's good. If you apply it to a pedophile, that's bad. You can teach a child to have empathy for a pedophile. Is that good? No. So what I want to teach parents is don't put positive connotation to traits. Ask yourself, through whose lens is it being taught? And today in K through 12, most traits and values are taught through the lens of a critical race theorist or a transgender cult recruiter. Now, I gave you an example of a transgender cult recruiter on empathy. Let me give you one from a critical race theorist. Personal responsibility or responsible decision-making. That's a big thing in social emotional learning, responsible decision-making. Okay. Hey, we're just teaching responsible decision-making. Parent, oh, good, I teach that too. Nope. Through whose lens is that being taught? Okay. Through the lens of a critical race theorist means that if you're a white child, when you become voting age, your responsible decision-making is voting for reparations.
Right.
If you're white, your responsible decision-making is to give up your spot in a school, even though you've earned the better grades, you give it to someone with lesser grades because of equity. Right. You give up certain things because of white privilege. If you're not white, then your responsible decision-making is to be an activist, is to tear down the systems, is to fight white supremacy. That's your responsible decision-making.
I mean, how does the layman find out these terms and find out what they actually mean?
It doesn't matter, because all you have to understand is that every term that they put through is going to be put through this lens today in K through 12. So, because we can go through all the terms, but they're going to come up with new terms. So, for example, career readiness. Of course, I want my child to be career ready or college ready, career ready.
Right.
That's a term we've used for a long time. Okay. Through whose lens is that being taught? Okay.
Yeah, so you can't be ready unless you know how to respect pronouns, right?
There you go. You got it. So we try not to teach the detail. We can teach the details that we do, but what we really want to do is to help you understand the manipulation.
Right.
Because if you don't understand the baseline, weaponizing your kindness, language contamination, if you don't understand those two things, we can teach you A, B, C, D, but the moment they introduce F, you're going to be fooled again. Right? You go, oh, I got you on empathy. I got you on responsible decision-making. And then they go career readiness. They're like, well, Courage Has Happened didn't teach us that. Oh, well, I guess it's career readiness. And then now you get fooled again. Right? Right. And then if I do that, then it's like, oh, community school sounds great. The dentist van sounds wonderful. And you get fooled again. Whole child, well, yeah, I make sure my child's well-rounded, and you fooled again. But if we try to teach parents those two concepts, then it's harder to fool them.
So how do you teach? Do you do classes? Do you tour? Okay.
We do. We come in, we work with specific parent groups, and then we teach them what we just talked about so they can go off and teach. So we try to bring the Courage as a Habit model to the states. We work with, and it depends. Some states bring us in through parent groups. Some bring us in through organizations like nonprofits. They want to bring us in to help because they want to make a difference. Places of faith, churches, mosques, those type of things. Any nonprofits, they bring us in to do training. Sometimes it's a few months. Sometimes it's just one or two trainings. Mm-hmm. And depends on what it is. And so we talk about, is it the transgender ideology you want to talk about? Is it critical race theory? We always lay out social emotional learning because that's the umbrella it brings in. Sometimes we talk about the books. It just depends on what kind of what is it that they want to attack first? What is it that they want to stop the bleeding in their particular district? I mean, at the end of the day, you want to solve all of it, but you're not going to solve all of it because it's a long game. So then we go in, we listen, we talk, and go, okay, well, if you've got these grants are coming in for the mental health, if you have an opportunity to stop the grant, because they haven't hired a ton of social workers and school counselors yet, we recommend you go this first. Don't worry about the books because the books are already in there. Let's keep the social workers and counselors out. If they already, proved it, you got a lot of social workers and school counselors. All right, well, they're going to start meeting with your children. So now we got to teach parents, how do you opt out? Because they're there. So how do you ensure? So it depends on where the school district is, what it's coming. Like, for example, Maine has a chapter coming up called Chapter 117 that further allows school counselors and social workers to keep secrets from parents. Well, we're going to fight that because that actually hasn't happened yet, right?
Right.
So it just depends. It depends. But we come in, we do an analysis of where we are, where you are. Do you have any legislation support? Or do you have 5 parents? Do you have 50? Are your parents mostly afraid, or are they mostly just unaware?
Right.
Are they aware, but they're afraid? Are they aware, not afraid, but don't know what to do?
Right. And see, a lot of ours quite frankly, are obedient to what they perceive the church is saying. And this week, Pocatello, Idaho, had a drag show, and a bunch of religious people went and sat in the seats. They did not say or do anything. They just sat in the seats.
Good for them.
And but then the church, the predominant religion, came out and said, we do not tolerate hate or encourage any of our people to be hateful.
Because
but it does seem like it is very easy to say, well, we're not going to support this within the walls of our church, but we're not going to do anything to protest it outside. In my opinion, that might as well be supporting it. The problem is that so many people then are afraid to go against that, even though it's not really being said. It's just being said, well, we're kind to everyone.
Weaponizing kindness.
It's not kindness. It is not kindness to break children.
It's cruel.
Absolutely.
The kindness brigade, the people, they weaponize kindness against you, but those are the most cruelest people I think I've ever met in my whole life.
Yeah, I often say be kind or else tends to be the slogan, the behind slogan. And it's tolerate, not just tolerate, but affirm and embrace everything. Or else you're not a kind person. And if you're not a kind person, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I think it's interesting. You should say that, to be kind or else. That's really
well, because if you're not a kind person, well, then guess what? It's justifiable to crush you.
That's right.
So who's
here? I'll share my screen. Oh, give me the screen share here. I'll show you guys something before we wrap up here.
Oh, okay, sure. Let me. I think it's this one. I'm terrible at that part of it.
That's okay. Yeah, you got it.
Okay,
good job. Good job. I'm going to share this here real quick. And it's, I think it's really interesting that you just said that.
Oh my gosh.
So this is the graphic, and I'll send them to you, and anybody can go to Courage to have it to pick, our tools up. But anyway, this is just a single graphic. And sometimes, you have to have a picture speaks 1,000 words. And we like to use, because, everybody learns differently, audio, visual, but a lot of people are visual learners. So we like to create storytelling and graphics and different things like that to teach. Some of it's technical, like social emotional learning, restorative justice, all these, the cult, the transgender cult, how it gets in, the love bombing. So those are very technical things. But then there's some kind of psychological things like weaponizing kindness. That's not really a technical program. That's a psychological manipulation. And this is what they're doing, is weaponizing your kindness against you. Be kind or else. And that's exactly what they're doing.
So right before we wrap up, so many people are afraid of being called bigots. They're so afraid of being hated by their neighbors. Where do they get the courage to? Where did you get it? You started off being, I'm not political. I don't want anything to do with this. Basically, I want to get away and hide, right?
Yeah. So when people tell me that they're afraid of labels, the biggest labels, and I'll ask them, I go, so why? I just ask, I'm not going to try to convince, I just ask them, so what is it about the label? What is it about the thing? And they'll say, well, what you can kind of add to this. I think, what I hear is, I don't want to be called transphobe. I don't want to be called racist. I'm not a racist. And that hurts me, right? That's insulting, or that's, people are going to think I'm a racist, and they think that, right? And I go, well, who's calling you that? They'll say, what? My neighbor, person online, school board member,
my
counselor, my boss, right? So I go, is it the word, or is it the person that you're respecting? So I ask, is it the word? And most people say, yeah, it's the word. I don't like the word, right? So I'll go, okay. Let's say you and your spouse are walking in downtown out to dinner, and you're walking to the restaurant, and all of a sudden a crazy homeless person comes out, starts screaming at you. You're a transphobe bigot. You want to kill kids. Okay? This crazy homeless person screams at you. You will probably jump back, cross the street, and go, oh my God, right? We're downtown. That's what happens, And likely, once the kind of shock wears off, you'll go to dinner. You won't talk about him. You're not going to go home and go, oh my God, he called me a bigot and a race. Oh my God, this is awful. You're not going to think about it. Why? Because a crazy homeless person said it. But if you go online, and the person online, or a teacher or your neighbor calls you that, all of a sudden, it keeps you from standing up for your children. It's not the word. It's not the label. Because if the label hurt, it would hurt even when the crazy homeless person said it. The words have no power unless you give it to it, unless you give it power. You know you're not a transphobe. You know you're not a bigot. They say that to you to shut you down. This is why you don't care when the homeless person does it. Because if the word actually hurt, it would hurt no matter who says it. So now we're coming to the point of, now it's not the word or the label that scares you, it's who's saying it. Because if it was the word or the label, you feel like crap when the crazy homeless person said it, but you didn't. So now we know it's not the label or the word, because things like racist, homophobe, bigot, transphobe didn't even exist until 5 minutes ago. How can you be afraid of a word that never existed until 5 minutes ago, right? So now we go, so it's the people saying it. That's what's killing it. It's not the word. So don't tell me you're not afraid of the label, right? Because if it was a label, you would say the homeless person makes you feel bad, but you don't. So now it's the people saying it. Okay, it's the people saying it. What is it that these people are trying to fight against you on? You say, I don't want my children to read porn, like genderqueer, or this book is gay. I don't think children are born in the wrong body. These people are like, no, you're a bigot and transphobe. So now you're giving a lot of power to people that want to mutilate children. Why? Those are the people. Like, if a pedophile calls you a bigot because you don't let him walk into a room with your child, would you care? No. How are these people different than pedophiles? Why? Because they're in a position of power, because they're your boss, because they sit on a school board, because they're a teacher, because of their position. But there's a lot of people who are pedophiles in high positions. A child abuser is a child abuser. Why would you care about what a child abuser says about you? That's how you got to walk parents through. I don't care what a child abuser calls me.
Right.
They want to mutilate kids. I don't want. I'm glad they don't agree with me. That would be.
I think if we remember that they don't just want to mutilate quote unquote kids. They want to mutilate your kid. Their goal is 1 in 5. Yeah. 1 in 5 children will be queer.
Yeah.
So the chances of it being your child. Yeah. And then we just lose courage. Like, you don't stand up for your own child.
So to get courage, there's no magic pill. Here's how you get courage. Here's the formula. There's no magic pill. There's no magic line you can say. A lot of people ask me, what do I say so that I can fight for my child? What they mean when they ask me that is, what line or story can you give me so that they won't call me a transphobe or a bigot? That's what they're asking me, right?
Right.
There is none. If you're not willing to be called a meaningless label, you will not be able to stand up for your children. There is no magic line. There's no magic word. In fact, I tell them, get used to saying this phrase. There is no such thing as a trans child. There is no such thing as a trans child. It is a social contagion. It is child abuse. No child is born in the wrong body. There are intersex kids, and that's like 0.002%. And there's treatments for that, but it's 0.002%. So for all intents and purposes, there's no such thing as a trans child. There isn't. So if you're afraid to say that, if you're afraid to say a man can't get pregnant, then you cannot defend your child. So in order to have courage, every time you want to say something like a man can't get pregnant, if your heart is speeding because someone's going to call you something, the only way to develop courage is to say it anyway and take that arrow. And then the next time, you will not feel it'll be easier, but it'll be a little easier, because each time they fire that label at you, it stings less. Then by the 8th, 9th, 10th, 12th time, it won't matter. That's why we don't say, how do you get courage? We go, courage is a habit. We don't say, how do you get courage? How do you obtain courage? You don't obtain courage. You make it a habit. A lot of people who are physically very strong and mentally, emotionally very weak. You know, the thing I love to do is I love to box as a workout, as right. You know, just to exercise the pads, things like that. When you're working on pads and things, and when you're boxing, you can't get the combinations. There's no way to get the combinations right until you just do it. It's just repetition. And then eventually you don't think about it anymore. And then you're able to go through the progressions of the pad exercise, and it's no longer a conscious thing. There's no point in saying, oh, if you do this many exercises, you're going to be able to do this progression on the pads. But you know, if you keep at it, at some point in time, you're going to get that second nature on the pads, and then you can move up to the next progression. It's the same thing with courage. I can't tell you, if you speak out 6 times, you're going to have courage. You speak out 10 times. I don't know. I don't know you. Right. But I will tell you, though, if you keep going, at one point in time, courage will be a habit. Maybe it'll take you 20. Maybe it'll take you 6. I don't know. But I do know that if every time you go, oh my God, I shouldn't say this because they'll call me a transphobe or a bigot, That is your trigger to say it. Your internal trigger is, if you feel the fear of saying, I shouldn't say that because, that's your marker to say it.
Right.
And if you can get used to doing that, eventually courage will be a habit.
Alvin, did it start off for you? Was there ever a time when your voice quaked and your knees shook and you were like, how do I do this?
I think I still go through it every time we want to introduce something new, or when we're attacking something new. Like when we did ASCA, we spent a lot of time and effort, and I had no idea if people were going to accept it, if it was going to be a flop. And then the first time I went on a, interview like with you, or a radio station, or a, interview or a TV spot or whatever, I felt that, because now I'm putting myself out. I'm talking about something nobody talked about. Everybody thinks it's the guidance counselors. I mean, people could say he's crazy. He's a lunatic, right? It's just guidance counselors. And largely I did that, right? So then you get ASCA coming after me. You get, all these hit pieces and things like that. And I've grown to the point where I enjoy that. These people, when they do these hit pieces on me, when they do these, when they spread rumors, when they try to say I'm this or that, or I'm not this or I'm not that, I really enjoy it now, because it's helped me understand that what I'm doing is painful to their agenda. It doesn't mean that I don't get nervous. It doesn't mean that I still don't get that feeling in my heart of that fear that goes, maybe you should say it like this, or maybe you shouldn't come out that strong. I still get that. Largely, the way my brain now, the way I've trained myself, is courage is more of a habit than fear. So fear is still there, but it's more like a 90-10. Whereas when you first start out, it's like 95-5. You have 5%. You want to say it's a 95%, you got fear. So you just have to work that percentage down to 10-90, 20-80, and then but you can't do it. There's no magic phrase. There's no, people always ask me, Alvin, what do I say? How can I say it? What you know what to say. You're asking me, is there a way to say it without being called a transphobe?
Right. Or a way to still be protected.
That's right. That's what you're asking me.
Yeah.
And so if you're asking me that, you're asking the wrong question.
Well, and I think that the main question that you need to ask is, what do you have to lose? And the answer is everything.
Everything.
Our children will lose everything if we don't stand.
Your children are watching you be a coward. And so not only are you practicing fear as a habit, you're now passing that fear onto them. Now they have fear as a habit. Every time they hear their mother or their father goes, you know what, honey, we shouldn't say it like that. My boss might see it, your sister might see it, and they'll cause this. Oh, I don't. The children hear that. You're quite literally passing on fear to them at a very young age, when they should be hearing their parents speak with courage. Fear is killing two birds with one stone. Not only are you not protecting them, you're also having them acquire fear,
which is making them fragile and making them have that kind of experience where the therapist sees them and sees, oh, yeah, there's one. We're handing our children over when we don't apply courage.
But if you speak with courage, and you speak with conviction, and you speak with, I don't care what people think, I'm still going to stand up for our kids, then the child at school is also emboldened to stand up for themselves, because they know if they get pushed, they'll be like, oh, my father's going to come get me. You're not going to want him to come get me, right? Then they have a confidence, right? But if they know, if they go, well, my mom and dad they don't want to say this, they don't want to say that, I'm not going to say anything, because who's going to protect me? If I stand up for myself and they push me and they call my mom and dad's going to come and say, yeah, you know what, I sometimes we just don't want him to be uncomfortable, but we understand that we don't want other kids to feel unsafe, but yeah, we're not racist. We love everybody. Come on, honey, let's go home.
Yeah, I think, and this will be my final comment, but I think that our children are in desperate needs of heroes.
Yeah.
And the first heroes that they have are their parents.
That's right.
So I really appreciate that you are doing what you can to be heroic. And I know that that's not why you do it, but that natural ability to stand up and to say what's right in a world that is completely pushing back and saying, shut up and take it.
That's right.
We need more of that. So I so appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me, and
I enjoyed our conversation, and I wish you the best of luck in what you're doing. Keep putting things out. I can't wait to see this interview.
Yeah.
And for your audience, go to courageisahabit.org. We make tools just for you. We don't make tools for people who spend 24 hours a day on this stuff. We don't want you swimming in this 24/7. We want you to love your kids, raise your kids, spend time with them, be involved in their life. But at the same time, we want to give you tools to be able to stand up for them with confidence and stay on offense. And not be emotionally blackmailed. So we give you these tools. These tools are made for you. These calls of actions are made for you. And as always, I like to remind people, we are a nonprofit. I have a very small staff, and we like to keep them employed because they work very, very hard. They work 6 days a week. Each tool that you see on Courage is a Habit takes hundreds of hours of research, of going back and forth. And we try to bring you our best work, and we continue to do that. So every support you give us goes right back to our fight to help you defend your kids.